We are still writing content for various channels and working with the algorithms on each channel to try to optimize for visibility. All of those tactics are the same. The various criteria of quality are still being applied in the same way as before, and AI isn't going to change your definition of quality.
I'm Margaret Kelsey,
And I'm Devin Bramhill.
and this is Don't Say Content.
And shout out to our producers at Share Your Genius. They're great at creating shows with strategic outcomes in mind. They've been with us since the podcast was just an idea, and they helped us bring it to life from strategy all the way to execution. And we absolutely love partnering with them.
So if you, dear listeners, are thinking of launching a podcast, which you definitely should, by the way, we recommend having a conversation with our favorite people over at Share Your Genius. Now let's get into it.
I'm wearing glasses today in honor of our friend Chris Walker.
And he was joking that in every episode, your glasses keep getting bigger and bigger.
I couldn't find bigger ones. My biggest pair broke a few years ago, and I loved them. They were vintage.
Oh, are you coming at this episode with rose-colored glasses?
Yes. Because we're talking about quality. So I was like, I need
You need the optimism.
the optimism, especially for how hairy this conversation around quality is now. It's wild. And the AI piece is, I think that's what kicked off this new conversation, I guess you can call it. To me, it's a bunch of ranting.
Yeah.
The AI stuff has really brought this question about quality back into the fore. Quality already didn't have a solid definition, as we talked about in season 2. And so we're bringing this topic back again because we need to unpack it all over again.
Redux. It's a real word.
It's a word that I didn't invent, but wish I did. Okay, so just to recap for folks, because the last time we talked about this was in season 2, and that was the first time we talked about it. So the big question that we asked in that episode was, what is quality content? And who does it serve? Why does it matter? And the conclusions that we came to is, one, it doesn't have a solid definition. It's not canonical.
Yeah. And therefore is a very dangerous word to be thrown around if you haven't done the work inside your organization or company or team on what you mean by that word. That's one where your spidey senses should go up if somebody's just throwing around quality and you haven't had the conversation of what that actually means.
Yeah. And I do think it's become also a buzzword for folks who just want to be heard on LinkedIn. And so it's being dissected this way and that, often to contradictory conclusions, sometimes by the same people. This is like why don't say content is don't say content, because it's like,
Yeah.
don't fucking say quality anymore. Shut up. Like, just stop.
Don't say content. Don't say quality content. Don't say quality. Shut up, you jerks.
So it's a useless word that has no meaning, that you and I, it was basically another conclusion that we had. And that the question of, do you have the same definition of high quality content across stakeholders, including your customer, most importantly? So you can have all the internal style guide debates that you want and make those updates. But if that style guide is still not grounded in your customer and how they think, the types of content they like to consume and how they like to consume it, if that isn't at the basis of your quality conversation. And then I think one of the points that you made is that I thought was really important was this idea of the shipper versus polisher. But you were basically saying the value of shipping over polishing is greater because actually shipping is a form of polishing because you're putting the iteration out there that leads to feedback or actions. You said velocity beats polish every day. That's what you said. And it's like, how can you even achieve quality content without shipping? And so this idea of keeping it inside and incubating it for a long time is like not what the fundamentals of content marketing were even based on. It was based on shipping. So that was kind of the gist of our conversation back then. We also added a new word to the English language, stuck lyrical, because of course, this came from me because it's useless, but I thought the word sounded kind of funny. Like, I think it's an ugly word for something that's supposed to be beautiful. And it's because it has this like lyrical beginning with a staccato ending.
I think opposite. Quality.
Oh, you think that's the lyrical part?
I think, yes, staccato is quali, and then T is like the lyrical part.
Oh, you know what? You're right.
Yeah. Quality.
I was emphasizing on the T, and so I was feeling yeah, you're right. Like quality. Okay, so we are coming back to this conversation about quality content. And when I was thinking about this, the first thing I had were questions. I didn't even have perspective. I was like, what are we even going to say? And I think one of the first new questions I had was, what does quality content definition mean in the AI context? Has the definition actually changed or not? Because I think at this point it's unavoidable. I think you have to factor in AI when you're thinking about your definition of your personal or company definition of quality. And so I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but you go first.
Yeah. So, how I'm categorizing AI in my brain is it's a tool like any other tool. And you wouldn't say, hey, let's just spin up everything through whatever other tool, predictive text or writer or whatever other thing that you're using, or pen and paper is a tool, right? And you wouldn't say anything created by this is quality.
I literally heard that on a podcast this morning. I was listening to This Old Market,
Oh, I don't listen to that. So this is my own insight that's aligned to other people's, which is always exciting.
and he literally gave the example. He's like, "You don't use" it was off the cuff, the same as you, and he said, "You don't call a pen a strategy."
It's just a tool. Yeah. And so that's how I think about it is like, then you have to decide what your internal alignment is around when and how you use that tool. And then what level of, again, polish, whether that's human polish or tool polishing, that then gets you to whatever level of quality that you decide. Right. And I think that a good place right now for AI is in idea generation, maybe solving the blank page problem of getting some words down before so you don't have to just stare at stuff. But I do think that it's not to the level yet, and it could be changing very rapidly, that you could automate stuff without having a human being do a quality check on it or an edit afterwards or make sure that you're even prompting and using it in the right ways, right? And I think that's where the quality comes in is from the human intervention of the usage of the tool and not the tool itself.
The timing on this is so odd. On This Old Marketing, I was listening to it this morning, which is why it's top of mind, but it spoke just to that. They made the point that this is the dumbest AI is ever gonna be, because even the stuff behind the scenes that has not been released yet is 9 months ahead of today. And so that's kind of to your point, but also humans as they relate to AI are the dumbest they're gonna be. And so it's only gonna get better and better. I don't necessarily see the desired future state to be that we don't have to edit anything after. I think it's unreasonable because you have to edit human work too. I don't think that's so important. I think the generative aspects of it, like keyword research, creating outlines and content briefs, being able to process more information quicker through the summaries they provide of various articles so that you can create faster and create depth faster is really interesting to me. And I think the folks who are really embracing AI and experimenting with it are able to achieve that. And I think the rest is just people making noise.
Another interesting thing that we can think about is not about using a broadly trained model to create content, but as soon as we start to have enough recordings, data point, our own writings to be able to train our own AI model on what are all the things that I've said about my perspective on this thing and creating content from that, I think it can also start to augment the personal branding work, right? Of, hey, it's not that I'm just like crowdsourcing every opinion on whatever topic and trying to build something out of that, but really like, what is my nuanced opinion? And can I find a way that I can create content from my own personality and my own insights that's easier to do?
Like, how can you intersect that using AI with the external to help you create argument or more nuanced versions of your argument? Some of that's already there in terms of AI learning your tone and voice, being able to incorporate brand standards, things like that. But I think what you're talking about is beyond, which is can I put in data about my customer and continue to update that, make that a flexible flow of information from customer support and sales and marketing and product into this thing that can not only a version of creating a shared language, which is very interesting, but it also becomes an automated way of staying up to date with what your customer cares about or could be. And that to me is really interesting because then you have AI as like this living, breathing thing, like another person that's the hub for all this information. There's multiple benefits and output opportunities. I think that's really exciting to me.
And I think the thing to me, it feels like the downfall of a lot of generative AI right now is the fact that the models that it's trained on are so large, right? And instead, I think that once we start playing around with it in sandboxy capacities, we are naturally editing it before the generation actually happens. And so I think the outcomes or the output of generative AI will be even more useful the more constraints we put on it. But that's what we know about creativity in a nutshell, right? Creativity comes from constraints. If I tell you you have unlimited resources to make any type of creative output in the entire world, you'd be stuck. But if I say you have $50 in 1 hour to make the most interesting Loom video about a specific topic, you'd get out there, right? So I think that that's a piece of it too, is the more that we can figure out the place of editing and sandboxing with these tools, the more interesting they'll become.
I wouldn't want it to replace the human aspect of that, which is it's almost like the imitation of life. And so what I used to do when I had an illustrator and a designer at the company at which I had access to using as director of content, I would go to my illustrator and say, "This is what the blog post is about today." And he would create an image just based on what the blog post was about. And if he had trouble, like if it was too
Vague.
yeah, or just broad, he would come to me and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about going this direction. What do you think?" And I could go back to him
Yeah.
and respond, and that is literally an AI conversation right now.
I was like, you're not calling him a bot, is he? Are you?
He was way better and it was more fun, to be honest, and I don't think that any of that is going away. I just think it's interesting to, like, get all the noise out of the way and look at what's really happening, and it's just this idea of technology imitating life, and if you really look at it, what has really changed? What has actually changed from a first principles standpoint? Because you've got this two-sided conversation that some people make both sides themselves, which is AI makes content creation faster. So you should incorporate it or you're going to be behind the times in marketing and you're ultimately going to die. Then there's the AI content is garbage and it's ruining search results and there's no place for it here. But the thing that I think is missing there is really truly parsing what has changed and what has stayed the same. And I did a little mini exercise on this and it was shocking to me to see how everything was exactly the same.
So what was your exercise?
So I went around and I looked at the posts on LinkedIn that talked about quality content because everyone's talking about AI. Every single one had the characteristics of AI content versus the characteristics of what they deem to be good, high quality content. The words that came through on quality content were things like originality, being in depth, having a point of view, conversational, prioritizes user intent, provides value. Obviously, value is a problematic word in and of itself because it also has no meaning. But none of that strays from our concepts of content before. Like, what's different about that?
I think people were creating shitty content before generative AI, right? We've been doing this for a long time. We've been trying to find the hacks. We've been trying to find the automations. We've been trying to find the algorithm, tricking the algorithm kind of thing. If you're always keeping the target customer or your user top of mind when you're creating content, no matter if you're using generative AI or not, you're going to have the right North Star on what you're creating, right? And if your quality bar or your shared language internally is that this has to be useful to someone to read it rather than like, how many did you produce? then you're gonna be better. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine. If you use AI, if you don't use AI, I think somebody using AI might still be slower than somebody that's really good and prolific that doesn't. And so also that doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think the only thing that's changed here is it used to be people versus the machine. We were writing shitty content and it was up to Google search and their ongoing refinements to discourage that. And that was what the world that we operate in. Now it's like the machine versus itself. It's Google fighting itself over the way it's changing how the information that's given and how it's categorized and summarized, et cetera, versus their own AI creations and how those things function. And so it's like they're competing with themselves almost, which I think is really interesting. It's like the machine versus itself. And so now I think there's some of this panic is this feeling of a lack of control where humans aren't even really involved anymore. And this is a feeling I'm percepting in the world, not a reality or anything I buy into. And so I think that's the scary thing for folks. So, like, looking at a perfect example of this is I did a search today for something. It had to do with quality content. I was trying to like find an answer or something. And I clicked on the perspective tabs for one of them, and it's nearly 100% Reddit and Quora. And both of those are notorious for absolutely garbage content, as well as some good content, but it's like hard to find and usually nestled in comments. Right now, it's kind of shitty. Like you get these garbage answers from who knows who these people are. And I'm like, I don't know if this is credible or not. Probably not. And Reddit sucks anyway, but that's like a step in the direction of where they're trying to go. Like they're not at the end point yet.
I have a couple thoughts here. I
Yeah.
think that there's a really interesting thing that's been happening throughout as long as technology has been increasing and changing, and even back from like we used to live in these tight knit communities where you knew everyone, right? You knew who to listen to, you knew who was like the town quackpot. Credibility was a social structure. And then as we even industrial revolution and moved to cities, we lost that sense of we understand people's credibility, right? And so then there's all different social structures that we created to sort of deem credibility, right? And then even thinking about the rise of Uber and Lyft, they had to create a credibility system in those apps in order to weed out bad players and in order for people to know, like, oh, yeah, the driver wants to pick me up because I have a great Uber score. Shout out to my Uber score. But I think that like technology can be used to also solve for the credibility problem, right? To almost crowdsource credibility. But anytime that we see these technological lifts, we're going to lose that piece of credibility for a little bit until we figure out how to get technology to create that social system of credibility. And I think that's a really interesting thing as we start to see what changes with generative AI is that we lose a piece of, well, who created this thing, right? Are they credible? What were the sources that were used when this thing was spit out, and are those sources credible? And I think in different industries it's different, right? I think that if you're in the medical field, if you're in the research field and the model is trained on actual scientific papers that went through rigorous credibility markers and then it's trained on that, that's interesting, right?
Well, they have that already. You can see the sources of an article. So you're like, if it's got NIH and Cleveland Clinic and all that, I can see that there and be like, oh, this is a good summary.
Because we figured out the credibility piece of the fact that we're publishing this on the internet and we need to show the fact that this is credible, right? But I even think that models trained off of that data are going to be more credible than like you and I know that we were writing content for things that I knew nothing about product design and UX and UI when I first started at Envision. And I quickly realized that I needed to like go to designers and get them to paint my fence for me and to write the content. But I wrote a couple articles not really knowing anything about anything. And I know there's lots of companies and lots of blogs that have written a lot of stuff as like a content marketer without the subject expertise. And a lot of times how they figured it out was they Googled and read other articles that, heaven forbid, were written by other people without the subject matter expertise. So I think that there's this weird place, especially in B2B SaaS, where any generative AI is probably trained off of shit content. So we have to be also really wary of this thing, right? Like you think about as an industry, we were trying to game algorithms and keyword stuff and do some really weird stuff back in the day. And that is all public content, public data for these models to get trained on and then spit out idiotic shit. So I think that there's also some good stuff, but like I think this credibility issue is going to be one that it sticks around for a little while because I don't know if we figured it out yet.
We definitely haven't, and that's evidenced by if you were to abstract that idea of credibility, it's characterized by content moderation in general across the major social platforms, even things like GDPR and privacy and transparency around all that. We still haven't gotten to a place of trust with technology, in part because I think just technology moved so fast the past 10 years related to content. And the big thing that's missing, you call it credibility, I call it trust. How can you trust? And trust, we put it on such a pedestal, but in reality, trust is a choice in your source. And so, with the radicalization of the web post COVID, I trust a lot less in general. Like, I'm always waiting for the person to drop the other shoe and some bit of craziness. Meanwhile, we're having all these hearings with the government, with these social media platforms who are trying to promise gain trust with parents around the child's use of social media, not having them all kill themselves or bully each other. We never achieved trust. We just kept moving on and fixing and breaking things, which is awesome. But I agree with you 100%. We never achieved the amount of trust, and they haven't yet figured out how to demonstrate credibility online, and that's an impact on content. There also are some things though, like the fact that Google shows sources in their summaries that I can then go look into, or the fact that I can see in the perspectives channel, like this is from Reddit, this is from Quora. I can see ratings, I can see how many people commented. There are a lot of these smaller signals that day to day are helping me choose which things to trust.
Yes. And I think that's an important piece of if you're thinking of it as a consumer or somebody that is part of a target audience somewhere, the thing you are looking for now in the sea of I was talking to somebody that called it the great cacophony. It's just so loud. Actually, that was Aaron White called it the great cacophony. Yeah. And I thought that was a great word because it's so spot on to like the fact that it's just loud squawking everywhere. And the thing you're looking for is where is that credible source? Where can I trust? And I think that as a company that's creating content, a good decision making framework that falls underneath your quality bar is does this piece of content build trust and credibility with my target audience, or is it just content?
And that's how it'll be prioritized too, because this goes back to brand. The only way to really build trust as a brand is to do the good work, genuinely provide value and help people. So like I agree with these things on this checklist that I found on LinkedIn. I agree with them. They're the same. That never ended. But now more than ever, that is what will help folks decide to trust you over some random article, which will lead to them having a positive perception of you as a company, as a product. And it's almost like this idea of brand credibility and brand trust is more important than ever. Because listen, everybody's laser focused on AI inaccuracies. Humans are wrong all the time. Humans are not fundamentally credible sources. They're not. They have emotions.
No, eyewitnesses and trials. It's like well known that like eyewitnesses are one of the worst things in terms of actually finding the truth because people's memory are very malleable, right? Like whether it was a blue shirt or a red shirt could change at any time.
And nobody cared when it was a question of humans, right? Quality content was never about, "Oh my god, can we trust this person?" The quality conversation was different. It was more like really untrustworthy people gained a lot of credibility through writing their own content. Look at Tony Robbins.
Hey, wait, are we canceling Tony Robbins? What's going on?
How did you not know that he's like the most notorious grifter on the planet?
Oh. All right. I'll go down to Tony Robbins rabbit hole after this.
It's not about me liking him or not. It's about very tangible examples of him advising people around this one thing that he, like, owned a stake in, and so he uses the credibility around some of his very valuable self-help stuff and has leveraged it to manipulate people to make money in other ways. Yeah, so it's like, is he credible? Yes and no. Like, some of the things that he talks about, I believe in. Like, he seems credible. He can speak in depth about it. He can give examples from his own life. He's talked to millions of people probably about it.
This is the interesting split between credibility and trust.
Exactly. So, this is kind of sad to realize. Brand credibility is perhaps most important. And you can be an untrustworthy person. You can be a grifter and still develop brand credibility and get people to believe you and call you a credible source, regardless of whether what you're saying is true, helpful, brings value to people's lives.
The thing that comes to mind about like, well, how, when you say that is to me, it's repetition and reach. And to me, that's the thing. And we talk about it too. I mean, we've said it before on the podcast, like repetition doesn't ruin the prayer. Most of the times that a message fails, it's not because it was the wrong message, it's because it wasn't repeated as much. But I guess you could go the nefarious route of if you repeat a lie enough times, people are going to start believing it, right? That's what a piece of it is. And so there's like this interesting split of with generative AI, you might be able to create, let's say the promise is more content, saturate the channels better than before. But there is this piece of if you do it in a way that's not building trust and credibility for your brand, or you're doing it in nefarious ways, it might still work. But like there is this core thing of like not wanting to lead people down a spammy, scammy lifestyle. I told you that I used to own Grow Stop Marketing as a domain name because I had this like, I'm like, I'm going to start shaming all of like the let's artificially in the near term inflate our lead number by doing some hacky ass shit that's actually bad for our brand, right?
Or making promises like, "We're gonna send you this, like, report when you give us all this information," and then the report has, like, nothing tangible in it that's, like, useful. What were you saying just before that? Because I wanted to continue that thread, but now I forgot.
Oh, that like repetition, even if it's a lie, can make people start believing in it, which is repetition. If it's a good message that resonates, that aligns to your brand, can be really helpful to build a target audience that like believes in you. But that is the same mental hack that happens just in all humans' brains that the more we hear something, the easier it is for us to call it into our brain and the easier it is for us to believe it.
Yeah, and I think the, like, friend of repetition is internal influencers. So, like, people at your company going out and speaking to various aspects of the product, your mission, vision, values, all of that. And not just in big speaking contexts, but like in smaller communities, in those sort of like meetup groups or whatever, networking, just going all around. And this goes back to last episode. You were talking about the value of untrackable brand awareness tactics, and that's really a key one, which is having the humans that represent the brand be part of building that trust, repeating that brand message, values, vision over, and that's a way to make it spread faster is if you have multiple people at your company doing it at the same time through different angles. I mean, that's what made Help Scout so
I'm
successful.
laughing so hard, and I don't have it next to me, but I'm starting this book called Cultish, and it's like the language of cults. And there is a piece of this where like repetition of a lie can help people believe it, right? Or there is this fine line of what works for human psychology done with nefarious purposes is bad. Human psychology and our brains aren't going to change, but like we have these faulty systems that can be hacked. And either you're a good marketer and you understand them and you try to use it ideally for good and business value, or you can easily start a cult.
I have 2 things to say to that. 1, I've always wanted to be a cult leader, but not the kind where anyone dies. But to your actual point about it's sort of a question of darkness and light, right? And I had just rewatched the 1st season of True Detective.
Mm. Did you watch the latest season?
I already watched the latest one, yes, and then went back to the beginning, and it's Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, very tough accent to follow, but
Yes. Last episode, very, very end, and Matthew's having a hard time. and they're sitting outside, and he's like, "If you ever look up in the night sky, it's mostly dark, even in the places where you can see the most stars." And Woody Harrelson comes back to him and says, "Yeah, but there's always more stars. Like, look at all that existing light. It may not be equal, but it's still there and it's still growing." But I think that's an important concept that sort of umbrellas a lot of this, which is even before quality content has always been a push and pull between people who genuinely want to build brands based on helping people and those who don't care. They're not necessarily malicious, they just don't care. And that's been reflected in tactics and then reactions by Google, for example, to change human behavior, much like trying to change AI to do the things that it will provide value to the majority. To me, I don't necessarily believe there's more or less of it.
People are just using new tools to do the same shit of either whether they cared a lot about their target audience or didn't. And I think to your point of like, as things get easier to do, I do think that there's more bad actors or neutral actors that come into play. The easier that something is to do, the more that we see, I think, neutral and bad behavior, just because there's more people getting into no.
No, because think about the ages of keyword stuffing, which was where you get the increase in volume is when someone finds a hack in a system to manipulate it to get what they want, and then a bunch of people follow on, and then it takes a while for these companies to catch up and then fix it. And so it's finding the early broken shit
Yeah.
that they can go around.
I want to clarify. It's not that there's a larger percentage. I'm just saying there's more volume. Like that is the cacophony, right? Is just there's more people creating content now because it's easier to create content. And so it's not that there's a bigger percentage of neutral and nefarious actors. There's just more of it now. Because I think that there's also people that maybe weren't creating really high quality content in the past because it was hard to do. Let's say using generative AI as idea topic generation or solving the blank page problem, it makes them easier to create great content now. So I'm just saying, like, the volume has increased, but not the percentages of neutral and nefarious actors.
But that's the thing. I don't think it's between neutral and nefarious. I think it's between people who are actively trying to, in their own definition, create the best content for the brand, for the customer, etc., who really like take pride in that. You have the nefarious actors who are just like, I want to find whatever unique opportunity I can find, and I just don't care about anything. Like I'm in it for the money, basically. The biggest portion, I think, is the middle. The don't care people, I think not knowing and not caring is as nefarious as someone who intentionally does something to create harm. But this giant middle is composed of people who are some of them are just trying to get by and doing the best they can, and so some of their content isn't that good, or they don't have the knowledge to know even what how to think about quality or have a conversation about it, or their definition of quality just doesn't look the same to us, and so we think they suck, and probably a lot of other people do. So I think, like, that giant middle covers most people, and we notice the 2 ends more, but that's where all that volume comes from, and some of them are bad actors, and some of them are just, like, they just don't know what they don't know. And it's like, if you go back to what content marketing is, we are still writing content for various channels and working with the algorithms on each channel to try to optimize for visibility. A definition of quality has been instilled in Google's algorithm. You can argue that all day long in terms of how good they've done or what they're doing or whether or not they're doing that. But, they have their definition that we adhere to. So we're still writing for the channel that is called search. We are still creating paid and organic content for social media platforms. We are still writing newsletters. Like we're still, all of those tactics are the same. The various criteria of quality are still being applied in the same way as before. And so to me, I take a step back and I say, going back to the beginning of what you said, AI as a tool. I'm like, oh, a new tool has entered the market and people need to figure out how to use it. And AI isn't going to change your definition of quality.
Yeah. It shouldn't change your definition of quality. And actually, as you're talking, I realize that there's probably like two subsections underneath this, where one piece of it is understanding the algorithm and understanding which pieces of working with the algorithm or like gaming the algorithm don't negate the quality of your content, right? Because sometimes those two things might be at odds with each other. Bad example, but let's say a while ago, I don't know if they're still doing it, but LinkedIn was really prioritizing those carousels, those image carousels. But it could be that your target audience doesn't like to consume content in that way. And so, where are these tension points of the algorithm wants us to do it this way? Quality is still whatever we can do to get in front of the most qualified eyeballs or the most eyeballs that would resonate with this message. And then the other side is like, what are all of those other pieces that actually serve our audience? And knowing where those friction points are, I think are really important. And that would help us with back in the day when everyone was like, oh, we just need to create an article and stuff it with these keywords that then make the article not make sense. And then we game the algorithm. It's like, yeah, but that's intention of actually serving your target audience. And so we can't do that. Right. And I think that as long as a shared decision making framework internally has both of those pieces, which is a piece of quality is being successful in the distribution channel, but where are those misalignments?
Yeah. Like search settings. Having better search settings where you can kind of say, like, this is the type of the medium I like, prioritize, et cetera, et cetera. And those are just the things that are still ongoing. We haven't figured them out, or that Google keeps trying stuff. I only reference Google because I'm being honest. I don't use whatever Microsoft, Bing,
Does anyone?
the Gentleman, or whatever, like all those.
I feel like there's some new, like really privacy oriented ones too these days.
Yeah, Arc, I think, is a browser that, but I think they use Google for search anyway. I don't know. Anyway, before we wrap up, I did stumble on a example of a piece of content I thought was high quality. I discovered a article from Hotjar. It's a big piece, so it's a guide. It's called Conversion Rate Optimization 101.
Oh, is there an author you want to shout out who did it?
This doesn't have an author because it's a guide, it's not a blog post. Oh, well, maybe they put the author at the bottom. It's probably Fio. I'm gonna give credit to Fio because she was there for a long time and she's really good at content, and so I'm just gonna assume this was her and say, "Fio, yeah, we like you still. Like, you're amazing." So, it's very much like a hub page, and so it's a guide to CRO. Like much stuff in content marketing, you can't talk about it in a vacuum. You have to relate it to other activities in the content marketing mix. And so the beginning of it is overviews or like summaries of step number 1, step number 2 that link out to detailed articles on specific keywords that they used. So, for an example, they do things like say, most CRO tools will do this calculation for you. CRO tools is linked. Things like conversion funnel and funnel analysis, web analytics, those are all articles that are logical for Hotjar to write in depth about and that are linked out in that guide. But that I, as a reader in that moment, don't need to go down that alleyway to achieve what I'm really trying to achieve here. And so it's just covering the bases for you so you have this one stop. Is it called a hub page?
The spoke pages would be those individual pages that are linked out.
And then when they get to the CRO stuff, they're like, this is where CRO really is your tool, like the primary function of CRO. And then it goes into detail in the article because that's what the article's really about. And I was like, this is classic B2B content marketing that works. It was the top ranked article on the page, and it should have been because it's that good. And that type of thing still works clearly and should work because it's really freaking helpful and well done.
Yeah, I think content marketing is not just blogs and blog articles the way it used to be, right? And the distribution channels aren't just post a link to my blog article on social media and put it in the newsletter and make sure it's optimized for SEO. Like now, as we're starting to create specialized content per channel, I think the thing that is missing is that information architecture piece that blogs really allowed you to do. And so I think that there is a little bit of grasping and we haven't figured out that piece yet. Yes, you can build big followings and build affinity and brand awareness on these social sites. But when somebody does really need to figure out the information architecture of how to fit that topic into their brain, that hasn't been solved for outside of bring them back to the blog and have them go through pages like that. And so that is not something to solve for at the end of this episode. That's just a little like hat tip of, hey, I see you content marketers. I see us all trying to figure that piece out.
Video, audio, because people are smartly optimizing content per channel too. It's like you may have something really valuable on TikTok and then a thing on YouTube and then a thing on your blog. It's like, how do you make sure you're centralizing all of that? How much organization, information architecture do you actually need?
And it could be that we need less now than we used to as consumers. I don't know. But again, these are maybe deeper topics to get into. Maybe there's something about information architecture and how that's changing in content marketing.
Also, I think that we still only barely scratch the surface of the value of leveraging your internal team to improve the quality of your content and how that's like more of a thing now than ever. A thing.
A thing. It's a thing.
I think it's important. So we still obviously have more to talk about, but
But I am impressed that we had a different take this time than our last quality content episode, even though we did touch on a lot of the same themes. And so,
this one was very AI driven. Oh, make sure to check out our newsletter on Thursday because we are sharing hot takes from our executive marketing friends for each episode. So we'll have people kind of coming in critiquing what we have to say.
yeah, head on over to Substack and sign up if you haven't yet so you can get not only access to when our episodes launch, but also folks that probably will disagree with us in smarter ways than what our episode was able to unpack.
And probably we will have already done some by the time this comes out, but we are doing more YouTube lives with some guests and stuff too, just to bring in new perspectives. That tends to go out via our newsletter. So just keep an eye on that.
Yeah. So, like, if you have a Spotify account, if you have an Apple Music account or an Apple Podcast account, if you have a YouTube account, if you have a Substack account, just go on over there and sign up Omni channel.
And give us 5 stars. Like, thank you for texting us, but when you do that, will you also please post it on Apple Pod It does help a lot, actually, and we appreciate it. Thank you all. Bye. Just kidding. Just kidding. Bye. But also bye. Okay, y'all, that's a wrap. Thank you, as always, for listening.
We'll be back next week. And just remember, you're doing great. You're doing great.
30% of you are doing great. The rest, you got to get your shit together. Come on.
You know which side you're on this week.
You know.
You know. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye. I saw you snacking at the beginning and I was like, oh, I'm going to hit record. Is she going to pop another one in her mouth?
Mm-mm. But yes, but now no.
The last one. The last one. What were you
I'm
eating?
wearing
What are you snacking on?
grapes.
Oh,
I think I might have a mild grape addiction
yeah.
now.
I feel like when I was growing up, we used to freeze grapes and I would love that as a snack. It's like a,
That's a really neat idea.
yeah, it's like a nice little texture.
I love that.
Yeah.